Welcome to the debate. Today, we are virtually standing on the sun-baked tarmac of Riyadh for the World Defense Show, WDS 2026. Now, for those who haven't tracked this isn't just some regional trade fair where people swap business cards. This has rapidly become arguably the biggest defense exposition in the world right now. It is a massive window into the shifting sands of military strategy, not just for the Middle East, but for the entire global defense industry.
It's an overwhelming spectacle, it really is. You've got 5 days of demonstrations, massive international pavilions, and billions of dollars of hardware just sitting there under the desert sun. But what caught my eye wasn't just the sheer volume of steel on display. It was the story that steel is trying to tell us about, the next 20 years of war. And I have to say, I think the story is a bit more confused than the brochures would have us believe.
I see clarity where you see confusion. And that brings us to the central question we're wrestling with today. When I look at the floor plan of WDS 2026, I see a decisive, almost revolutionary shift toward what I'd call integrated versatility. The old distinction between a transport truck and a combat system, it's vanishing. We're seeing lighter modular vehicles, particularly from Turkish and French innovators, that combine extreme mobility with high-tech lethality to solve every tactical problem at once. They're trying to solve the drone problem, the transport problem, and the fire support problem with a single chassis.
See, I come at it from a different way. I see a lot of optimism in those modular designs, certainly. But if you look past the gadgets and the buzzwords, WDS 2026 actually proves the enduring, brutal necessity of specialized heavy metal. You have the U.S. Army parking their M1A2 Abrams and Bradleys right there on the pavement. That tells me that despite the allure of the do-it-all 4x4s, distinct, specialized roles and massive protection remain the unshakable reality of warfare. You cannot software update your way out of a kinetic impact.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what protection means in 2026. I'm representing the view that the technology on display, specifically from companies like John Cockerill and Arcus, it demonstrates that agility and integrated firepower are the new armor.
And I am here to argue that physics is undefeated. You can put a cannon on a Jeep, but it doesn't make it a tank. I'll be defending the position that mass, specialization, and heavy engineering, the kind we see in the traditional armored forces, are still the only thing standing between a crew and catastrophe.
Well, let's get into the specifics, because the evidence for this shift is everywhere at the show. The most compelling narrative coming out of Riyadh is this concept of the full solution. We heard explicitly from the general manager of the Weapons Systems division at John Cockerill. Now, John Cockerill is a major player in turret systems, and they aren't just selling a gun anymore, they are selling a philosophy. They are taking 4x4 and 6x6 platforms, vehicles that used to be glorified battlefield taxis, and equipping them with medium-caliber turrets.
It's an impressive sales pitch, I'll give you that. But let's be precise about what this means. Full solution is marketing speak for we put a bigger gun on a smaller truck.
It's more than just bolting on a gun. It's about capability density. Look at the Turkish pavilion. You have Otokar and FNSS displaying a new generation of vehicles. We aren't just talking about trucks with machine guns for self-defense. FNSS unveiled the Kaplan FSRV. Now, the Kaplan is a tracked platform, but look at the integration. A new turret, a 30mm cannon, and anti-tank guided missiles on the side. The line between a light vehicle and a heavy striker is blurring because the technology finally allows it. You have the mobility of a reconnaissance unit with the teeth of a tank destroyer. That is the future.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered what happens when that light striker actually gets hit? I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that versatility replaces survivability. You mentioned the Turkish pavilion, but let's look at the American presence. The U.S. Army didn't bring experimental light buggies to the centerpiece of the show. No, they brought the M1A2 Abrams and the M2 Bradley,
which are legacy platforms designed in the Cold War.
They are proven platforms that are currently surviving on modern battlefields precisely because they are heavy. These are specialized combat monsters. And even if we look at the new agile vehicles you're so excited about, like the Arcus Mavericks, there is a contradiction in the design. They market it as a high-speed raider, yet the specs emphasize level 4 protection.
And we should probably clarify for the listeners what level 4 means.
Right, we're talking about STANAG level 4. That means the armor is rated to stop a 14.5 millimeter heavy machine gun round. That's decent protection against small arms. But it is meaningless against a tank shell, and it is marginal against a modern anti-drone guided missile or a large IED. If the future is all about speed and electronic warfare, why is everyone still obsessed with bolting steel plating onto these chassis? It suggests that deep down, engineers know that anti-drone is a buzzword, but survivability against mines and artillery, that requires mass.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it creates a false dichotomy between protection and technology. The new systems are doing both. But let's dig into that anti-drone aspect, because this is where I think the shift is most visible. You called it a buzzword, but at WDS 2026, it looked like a requirement.
It's certainly the flavor of the month. Every vehicle seemed to have a turret pointing at the sky, but pointing a gun at the sky and actually hitting a maneuvering drone are two very different things.
And that is where the technology has leaped forward. Take the John Cockerill CLWS, the Cockerill Light Weapon System. The manager explicitly stated that this remote turret, which can be fitted on a standard 4x4, uses a 25mm or the 30 by 113mm automatic cannon. But the key isn't just the gun. It's the ammunition. They are moving toward airburst capabilities, specifically for anti-drone defense.
Airburst is a significant technology, I agree.
It's revolutionary for light vehicles. Instead of trying to hit a tiny, moving quadcopter with a solid bullet, which is like trying to shoot a fly with a rifle, the shell is programmed to detonate near the target, creating a cloud of shrapnel that shreds the drone. This proves my point about integrated versatility. You no longer need a dedicated, expensive anti-air vehicle following your convoy. The convoy is the air defense. The 4x4 that carries your infantry now provides organic kinetic protection against drones. That is a game changer.
I see the utility, and I'm not denying that airburst is effective. But I think you're conflating self-defense with tactical air defense. A 25mm cannon on a 4x4 is a last resort. It's a get-off-me gun. If you want to see what real anti-drone warfare looks like, you have to look at the Aselsan display at the same show.
Aselsan is doing some impressive work, particularly with their electronic warfare suites.
But look at the difference in scale and intent. Aselsan is showing the Korkut. That is a dedicated short-range air defense system with a twin-barrel 35mm automatic cannon designed for massive volume of fire. They are showing the Gurs, which is an absolute beast. It combines a rapid-fire cannon and air defense missiles on a dedicated chassis. These are specialized, purpose-built systems. My view is that the threat of drones is becoming so complex, swarms, loitering munitions, high-speed dives, that bolting a general-purpose gun onto a transport truck isn't enough. You need the radar, the tracking systems, and the dedicated chassis of something like the Gurs. The add-on approach John Cockerill is suggesting feels like a stopgap.
It's not a stopgap, it's a democratization of capability. Not every unit can have a Gurs or a Korkut attached to it. Those are high-value assets. But if every light vehicle has a CLWS with airburst ammo, the aggregate defense of the force skyrockets. And interestingly, the source material notes that this weapon system is part of a European development project called FAMOUS. So this isn't just one company riffing, this is a consortium of European players standardizing this tech. It suggests that this turret-on-everything approach is the future doctrine of Europe.
Or it suggests that FAMOUS is an experimental program that hasn't faced the reality of combat yet. It's a development project. Meanwhile, the HIMARS rocket launchers we saw at the US booth, which are actually fighting in conflicts right now, are specialized standoff weapons. They aren't trying to be tanks or air defense. They do one thing exceptionally well.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The HIMARS represents the back line. I'm talking about the frontline maneuver force. And for that force, mobility is the new survivability. This brings us to the Arqueus Mavericks.
The Mavericks, a fascinating beast, if only for the confusing data surrounding it.
I think the performance speaks for itself. The stats are undeniable. We are talking about a vehicle with a max speed of 110 kilometers per hour. That is highway speed. It has a 400 horsepower engine developed with their own driveline. The representative noted they tested this vehicle in Jura last year, presumably a rigorous trial environment, and it was the only truck that had no breakdown.
Reliability is key, I grant you that. A broken truck is just a pillbox with bad visibility.
It's more than reliability. It's terrain dominance. It can cross 50-centimeter obstacles. It can handle a 60-degree slope. When you are moving at 110 clicks over rough terrain, you are a very hard target to hit. My position is that this speed allows you to engage and disengage at will. You don't need to take the hit if you aren't there when the shell lands.
Speed is life until you hit a mine. And that is where I have serious questions about the data we're seeing on the Mavericks. Did you happen to catch the weight figure in the source material?
I did. It mentions a 90 tons vehicle.
Exactly, 90 tons. Now we have to look at this critically. If we treat the source data as factual, and this is indeed a 90-ton platform, we are talking about something heavier than a fully loaded Abrams tank sitting on a 4x4 chassis. That implies a massive, almost paradoxical engineering challenge regarding ground pressure.
It is a staggering figure. It seems likely to be an error in the brochure, or perhaps it refers to the gross train weight. Maybe it's towing capacity in a logistics train. But let's assume for the sake of argument that it represents a heavy class capability.
Okay, if we take it as it stands, it completely undercuts the argument for agility. You cannot have a 90-ton vehicle that is agile in the way a light Jeep is. It would sink in sand, it would crush bridges. But if it isn't 90 tons, if it's a standard 12 or 15-ton light armored vehicle, then we have to look at the other stats, which are equally telling. It carries a crew of 10.
Which allows it to function as a high-speed APC.
A crew of 10 in a single vehicle. That makes it a high-value target. If you put 10 soldiers in one basket, that basket better be invincible. And despite the 110 km/h speed, the marketing focuses heavily on that level 4 protection we discussed. Why? Because the enemy gets a vote. In the Middle East, specifically where this show is taking place, the threat is IEDs. A 60-degree slope climbing ability doesn't help you when the road explodes underneath you. The specialized heavy armor of the past was a reaction to this exact threat. I fear the Mavericks is trying to be a race car and a bunker at the same time, and usually that means it fails at both.
I disagree. I think it represents a new class of MRAP, mine-resistant ambush protected, that doesn't sacrifice mobility. The problem with old MRAPs was that they were top-heavy and slow. This is trying to fix that. And notice, the payload is 3 tons. That allows for the integration of those mission systems we talked about. The electronic warfare suites, the anti-drone jammers. It's a hub.
A hub or a target?
A node in a network. And speaking of networks, we have to discuss the geopolitical layer of this show. Because the who is just as important as the what.
The indigenous question, or as I like to call it, the illusion of independence.
You're skeptical, but WDS 2026 is a showcase for what I call the democratization of high-tech warfare. It's not just the superpowers anymore. You have Turkey showing off a fully designed 5th-generation fighter jet at the Turkish Aerospace booth. You have Saudi Arabia's company, ERAF, unveiling their own 4x4 combat vehicles for the Saudi armored forces. This supports my argument for integrated versatility, because these nations are building platforms that fit their specific terrain and doctrine, rather than just buying off-the-shelf American heavy metal.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that narrative of independence. It looks good on the banners, but look under the hood. The Saudi pavilion is impressive, yes, but the source explicitly mentions that the Arabis, a prominent vehicle there, is a French 4x4 armored vehicle. The air defense system displayed nearby, the VL Mika, that's manufactured by MBDA, a European missile giant.
But they are being integrated into the Saudi armed forces. They are owning the system's integration.
Integrated, yes. Indigenous, that's a stretch. And look at the indigenous Turkish vehicles. The Kaplan is impressive, but it's often mounting weapon systems that are collaborative efforts. And looming over the entire exhibition is the shadow of the United States. Lockheed Martin didn't just send a brochure.
They displayed a full-scale model of the F-35.
A model is symbolic.
It's a statement of dominance. The source notes the F-35 has conducted recently different combat operation in the world. That is a flex. It says, while you are building your prototypes, we are flying combat missions. The presence of the U.S. Army with the M1A2 and the HIMARS reminds everyone that when the chips are down, the supply chain is still deeply Western. The World Defense Show is still dominated by the traditional big players' technology, even if it's painted in local colors.
I think you're underestimating the rate of catch-up. The fact that the National Guard Pavilion is showcasing Saudi-specific iterations of these vehicles shows a move toward autonomy. And Turkey, you can't just dismiss a fifth-generation fighter program. That is the pinnacle of aerospace engineering. Even if the supply chains are global, the integration is becoming local. And that local integration favors the versatile, multi-role platforms I've been highlighting. They want one vehicle that works in the sand, fights drones, and carries troops. They aren't interested in maintaining a fleet of single-purpose heavy tanks.
They might not be interested in it, but war might force them to be. The complexity of the GERS air defense system combining cannons and missiles shows that you can't just 3D print a solution. These are complex, legacy-style engineering challenges. You cannot improvise a radar system that tracks a Mach 2 missile.
But you can improvise the platform that carries it. That's the shift. We are moving away from the idea that the vehicle itself is the weapon, to the idea that the vehicle is just a bus for the software and the sensors.
That is a seductive idea for a procurement officer. It's cheaper, it sounds modern, but I worry it leads to a force that looks high-tech on paper but is brittle in reality. A bus for sensors is just a soft target if it can't take a hit.
Let's bring this to a close because I think we've illuminated a real fissure in modern military thinking. From my perspective, WES 2026 proves the future is hybrid. The rigid categories of tank, transport, and anti-air are dissolving. The most impressive exhibits were the ones that defied categorization. The Kaplan FSRV that scouts and kills tanks, the John Cockerell turrets that turn logistical trucks into air defense units. The sheer adaptability of these platforms is their greatest strength.
And I maintain that while the packaging is changing and certainly getting more expensive, the physics of war hasn't. The presence of the Abrams, the Bradley, and the obsession with Level 4 protection on the new vehicles proves that when the shooting starts, mass matters, specialization matters. You can't download an update to fix a lack of armor. The anti-drone requirement is real, but slapping a gun on a truck is a Band-Aid. The future still belongs to the heavy hitters who can survive the first punch.
It's a fascinating tension. On one hand, the agile, tech-heavy multi-tool. On the other, the specialized armored sledgehammer.
And for our listeners, the question is simple. If you were crossing the border in a modern conflict, would you rather be doing 110 kilometers an hour in a Mavericks 4x4, hoping your airburst ammo clears the sky? Or would you rather be behind the thick depleted uranium armor of an M1A2 Abrams?
A terrifying choice, but one that every procurement officer at WDS 2026 is trying to make right now. That does it for this edition of The Debate. Thank you for listening.